Hey everybody, this is the Holy Hand Grenade. Welcome to the show. Let's start at the beginning, with the fall of the Watchers and how they took for themselves human wives and sowed iniquity into the bloodlines. And how Azazel taught every species of iniquity upon the earth, and disclosed to the world all the secret things which are done in the heavens. As a result of these things, a schism was created, a phenomenon of sorts, one that's targeting men's hearts and minds. The patterns of this effect have been hidden from us by a radical, intelligent evil, cloaked in supernatural darkness. But we must not be afraid of it, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, nothing hidden that will not be made known. For it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and the honor of kings to search it out. By testing all things, we will discover secrets from the past, and set strategies for the future. By the renewing of our minds, we will walk by faith. Taking every thought captive, we assault the boundaries of reality. In this quantum game of hide and seek. It's a new perspective of Earth, from Earth. This is the Reality Distortion Effect on Take on the World TV.
To know life, you have to understand life. Affinity. Reality. Communication. These are the components of understanding. To know them is to know life itself.
He was the nation's youngest Eagle Scout at the age of 13. And twice journeyed to Asia before the advent of commercial flight. He attended America's first class on nuclear physics and was a pioneer at the dawn of American aviation. He led expeditions into then remote islands as a member of the famed Explorers Club and was a giant in the golden age of pulp fiction. He was a master mariner, licensed to captain vessels on any ocean, and a United States naval officer who commanded corvettes during World War II. His landmark work on the human mind rode bestseller lists for 100 consecutive weeks. And he's the most published and translated author of all time. He is L. Ron Hubbard, founder of Scientology.
Believers think of founder L. Ron Hubbard as a genius and a saint. Detractors call him a fraud, and according to his own son, one of the biggest con men of the century. Whether L. Ron Hubbard is alive or sane is also up for grabs. Our guests are Ron DeWolf, who is L. Ron Hubbard Jr. He split with his father in 1959, is now trying to gain control of his father's estate in the courts. Also with us is Vaughn Young, a Scientologist for 15 years, a professional writer, now working on an unauthorized biography of L. Ron Hubbard Sr. Good to have you both with us, gentlemen. Going back a long time ago, When Dianetics first came on the scene, it was really the first of all the self-help books, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and it was an enormous bestseller in 1950.
Right.
Do you know someone who has never fully recovered from a serious loss in life? Or a traumatic experience? And in your own day-to-day life, do you sometimes experience self-doubts, negative thoughts, unreasonable fears, upsets, or irrational behavior? The painful experiences of our past clearly have an effect upon our present behavior. But to what degree and why? What causes the mind to depart from rational thought or behavior? That is the subject of Dianetics. Every moment of your life, your mind is recording everything that's happening to you. Every sight, every sound, every taste, smell, pain, emotion, touch, everything. These recordings form what is called the time track, a consecutive record of all the experiences accumulated throughout your existence. Your mind uses this information to make decisions and solve problems relating to your survival. The better its decisions, the better you survive. Most of this data is stored in your analytical mind, that part of your mind that thinks, remembers, and calculates. But some of your experiences are not recorded into those analytical memory banks. It is a discovery of Dianetics that all of your painful experiences are stored in a previously unknown part of the mind. It's called the reactive mind, and it throws those experiences back at you in an irrational attempt to get you to avoid the same painful thing from happening to you again. Here's a simple and common example. At some point, you've probably gotten sick from eating tainted food. Later in life, if you see or smell or possibly even think about that particular food again, you start to feel a little nauseous. Now, you know that logically, the mere sight or smell or thought of a food can't physically make your body ill because you haven't actually eaten it again. And yet you're experiencing the same sick feeling you had before. This is your reactive mind, making you re-experience the same perceptions it recorded in that earlier incident, in a crude attempt to protect you from what it believes is a dangerous situation. It reacts solely on a stimulus-response basis and below your awareness. The painful experiences hidden in your reactive mind are the cause of your fears, insecurities, negative thoughts, unwanted emotions, and irrational behavior. You have been accumulating these deeply buried experiences throughout your existence. In fact, the most damaging among them occurred before you were born. Dianetics reveals how these negative experiences are stored and contains a technology to free yourself from them. What would life be like if all of the pain you've experienced no longer affected your abilities, emotions, and behavior? You would think and behave rationally, making the best possible decisions relating to your survival. You would be able to utilize your imagination and creativity to their fullest. You would be confident, more intelligent and productive and happier. You would be yourself, free to enjoy life and reach your full potential. In short, your mind would be clear. That is the goal of Dianetics. People achieve this state every day, and so can you.
What kind of a man was L. Ron Hubbard Sr. then who wrote that book?
Quite flamboyant. At the time he wrote it in the late 40s, he was pretty broke. And he had told friends and associates that the way to make a million was to start a religion. And that's how it got started. And he wrote the book, Dianetics, Modern Science and Mental Health, at Bayhead, New Jersey, in about a month or so.
You were with him for a long time, involved in Scientology yourself. How would you describe what Scientology is all about and what the Church of Scientology is all about?
Well, to put it in layman sort of a succinct terms, Scientology says basically that 74 trillion years ago, everyone willed themselves into existence, and through space opera games and science fiction sort of things, they have created this universe. This is a universe created by you, me, and everybody else. And now we find ourselves trapped into bodies, and the goal of Scientology is to get untrapped from these bodies and to return to this godlike state which is called operating Thetan.
How do you do that?
Through applied philosophy, through sitting down across from each other in chairs with e-meters, with a meter dial on it, and through answering questions and asking questions. This is supposed to release the various charges and the problems one has had throughout all of these centuries and hundreds and thousands of reincarnations, get the charge off it as if it was these incidents were a charged battery, and by doing so, this is supposed to return you to this state of high ability.
What goal does every living thing have in common? Survival. You are trying to achieve the highest level of survival possible, for as long as possible. As one looks out across the confusion which is life to most people, you will find that life can actually be subdivided into 8 parts, or 8 urges toward survival. In Scientology, these are called the dynamics. The first dynamic is self. This is the effort to survive as an individual, to be an individual. It includes one's own body and one's own mind. It is the effort to attain the highest level of survival for the longest possible time for self. The second dynamic is creativity. This dynamic contains the family unit and the rearing of children, as well as anything that can be categorized as a family activity. Creativity is making things for the future, and the second dynamic includes any creativity. The third dynamic is group survival. This is the urge to survive through a group of individuals or as a group. The fourth dynamic is species. This is the urge toward survival through all mankind and as all mankind. The fifth dynamic is life forms. This is the urge to survive as life forms and with the help of all life forms. It is the effort to survive for any and every form of life. It is the interest in life as such. The sixth dynamic is the physical universe, or MEST. MEST stands for matter, energy, space, and time, which are the component parts of the physical universe. It is the urge to survive of the physical universe, and with the help of the physical universe, and each one of its component parts. The seventh dynamic is the spiritual dynamic, the urge to survive as spiritual beings, or the urge for life itself to survive. The eighth dynamic is the urge toward existence as infinity. The eighth dynamic is commonly supposed to be a supreme being or creator. Correctly defined as infinity, it actually embraces the allness of all. It is represented here by the symbol for infinity. The dynamics could best be represented as a series of concentric circles, wherein the first dynamic would be the center, and each new dynamic would be successively a circle outside it. The basic characteristic of the individual includes his ability to expand into the other dynamics. But only when the seventh dynamic, the spiritual dynamic, is reached in its entirety will one discover the true eighth dynamic, the creator. A person is at his best and is happiest when he is surviving well in every area of his life. Scientology is for use and has workable technology for you to increase your survival across all dynamics.
In print, I've read that you've described your father as the devil, Hitler, total fraud, a con man. It's pretty strong language from a son toward his father.
Yes, but true.
In what way? In what manner?
Well, he was very deeply involved in black magic from early teenage years, which was the use of drugs and hypnosis as an example. He used to conjure up these demons and thereby plug into them or have them plug into him. And a lot of his early writing was, which could be called spirit writing. And so he was very deeply involved in black magic as an example, especially from Allister Crowley, which was an English black magician. And around 1947 or so, he decided that he was the Beast 666 incarnate, because that's what Allister Crowley was, and he died in 1947.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. For Allister Crowley, these few simple words represent the path to enlightenment. The tabloids labeled him a black magician, the wickedest man in the world, and the man we'd like to hang.
Allister Crowley is an amazing figure, and the things that he's done are interesting, they're scary, they're controversial. You don't need to rely on the exaggerations of the tabloids to tell an interesting story.
And he wanted to experiment also with things that were considered as illegitimate or forbidden.
His admirers saw him as the prophet of a new age, master of the mystic arts, poet of liberty.
The gods had chosen Crowley to be the prophet, and Crowley was just the guy who had an ego to say, I can handle that.
By any standards, Allister Crowley is an enigma.
The Allister Crowley connection was not highlighted or mentioned. Because I worked in his personal office, I was able to find out about the Jack Parsons connection through people that would send in letters with articles talking about his involvement with Jack Parsons. So that, it wasn't that it was hidden, it just wasn't mentioned and there was no focus on it.
Jack Parsons was born into a wealthy Los Angeles family on October 2nd, 1914. His parents would separate while Jack was still very young, and later in life he stated that this event contributed greatly to his hatred of authority and his self-described spirit of rebellion. It's also been speculated that the divorce of his parents was a major factor contributing to his Oedipus-like devotion to his mother. Now, as a child, Jack Parsons was withdrawn, isolated, suffering torment and bullying at the hands of other children. But he was brilliant, and by his teenage years, he grew interested in the sciences of chemistry and physics. He would remark that at one point in time, the family fortune was lost, likely due to the separation of his parents. However, these lean times would be only temporary, as by his 20s, Jack would inherit a very large Victorian mansion in an affluent area of Pasadena after the death of his father. The self-taught Parsons would attend both Stanford as well as the University of Southern California, but leave before ever receiving a degree. Now, he would go on to work with organizations including the California Institute of Technology, Aerojet Engineering Corporation, the North American Aviation Corporation, the Hughes Aircraft Company, and Parsons had quite a reputation as a flirt and a womanizer, seducing female employees at both JPL and Aerojet. He was generally regarded as an eccentric, sometimes greeting guests with his pet snake wrapped around his neck, and he used a mannequin holding a bucket as a mailbox. He was active in fencing and archery, and he liked to prank people with explosives. And there were times that he would spend hours in the bathtub with his toy boats. Now, the U.S. government considered him a security risk due to the activities of his private life, and the FBI kept a file on him that suggested he was potentially bisexual. But regardless of the government's speculations about his sexual orientation or the eccentricities in his personal life, the work of Jack Parsons made the American space program a reality. Werner von Braun would remark that Parsons was the father of the space program for his pioneering contributions in the development of rocket technology. To this day, Parsons' likeness is immortalized in a statue at Jet Propulsion Labs, which he co-founded. Now, there's also a crater named for him on the dark side of the moon, but we're not here to discuss rocket science, because the most fascinating aspect of Parsons' life was his obsession with the occult and his dedication to high ritual magic, as well as his association with Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard and the beast himself, Allister Crowley. So today, we're going to discuss the work that changed Parsons' life, and very well it may have been a factor in his death, a ritual that was called the Babylon Working. So in 1939, Parsons converted to Thelema, Allister Crowley's religion. In 1941, Jack and his first wife, Helen, joined the Agape Lodge. This was the California branch of the OTO, the Order of the Temple of the East. Now, at Crowley's directions, Parsons replaced Wilfred Talbot Smith as the leader of the group in 1942, and he ran the lodge out of the Pasadena mansion. Now, Parsons got fired from JPL and Aerojet because of the infamous reputation and the alleged illicit activities of the lodge. Also, his hazardous workplace conduct was a big consideration. So in 1945, Parsons divorced his first wife, Helen, because he was having an affair with her teenage sister, who then left him for L. Ron Hubbard. And while Hubbard and Parsons made a good pair when it came to occult rituals, at home there was a whole lot of tension because Hubbard lived off of Jack while subsequently stealing his girl and flaunting it in his face. But see, in 1946, the pair embarked on the Babylon Working, based on ideas that were pioneered by Allister Crowley in his 1917 book, Moonchild. The Babylon Working was a series of high ceremonial magic rituals conducted by Parsons and Hubbard between January and March of 1946 in the Mojave Desert. Now, the objective of the rituals was to manifest an incarnation of the elemental spirit of the divine feminine archetype known as the Scarlet Woman or Babylon. Now, nearly immediately upon completion of the initial series of rituals, Parsons would meet Marjorie Carmen in his own home, and he instantaneously regarded her as the physical manifestation of Babylon. Now, Parsons, with Hubbard and Marjorie Cameron, whom Parsons married in 1946, they then move on to the next phase of the rituals and attempt to produce a child by means of sex magic. And even though no child was conceived, Parsons still regarded the rituals as a success. Now, during the entire course of the Babylon Working, Parsons had maintained constant correspondence with the aging Allister Crowley, and in many regards, Parsons was being groomed to become Crowley's successor. Marjorie, for her part, remarked that neither Parsons nor Hubbard were the same after the Babylon Working. She claimed that it changed these men. Hubbard developed a paralysis on the right side of his body due to the ritual, and after he recovered, he became almost overcome with this energy, and it seemed that he was accessing an intellect that wasn't really his own. Then this may have been the result of some kind of experiment they were working with these high magic practices. Now, Hubbard and Sarah then elope, but not before stealing Jack Parsons' life savings. Soon thereafter, Hubbard channeled the bulk of his energy into his book Dianetics and the fledgling Scientology movement. Now, Parsons, on the other hand, seemed to follow down a darker path, continuing his magical pursuits. And though the Babylon Working ritual had been completed to fruition, the chain reaction of the work had yet to fully manifest. So after Hubbard and Sarah defrauded him, Parsons resigned from the OTO. He held various jobs and acted as a consultant for the Israeli rocket program. And mere months before his death, Parsons wrote that he would be consumed by fire, and he was willing to be the supreme sacrifice in honor of Babylon. He foresaw that an ending was growing near. As such, it could very likely be the end of his existence. Now, during the height of McCarthyism, Parsons was accused of espionage and from then on was blackballed from working in rocketry. In 1952, Parsons died at the age of 37 years old in a laboratory explosion in his own home. Now, this attracted the attention of the national media. The police would rule it an accident, but people that knew Jack Parsons suspected suicide or assassination. Now, Parsons' mother, upon hearing the news, committed suicide herself. Now, to add to all of this, it's also been speculated by those in the UFO community and some in the religious community that the Babylon working is directly responsible for the UFO flap that followed. As it was within the same year that the ritual concluded, Crowley died, the Roswell crash occurred, and then the flap of UFOs followed in the 1950s. This leads some to conclude that these beings that we assume to be extraterrestrials are in fact some type of other entity, perhaps even demonic in the guise of alien. Now, Jack Parsons was a brilliant but troubled man, and perhaps in some ways he was a victim of his own search for some meaning and control over a world that seemed to be at odds with him at every turn.
To get into what is called the operating thetan, or OT as Scientology calls it, you should be able to have these abilities of telekinesis, moving objects around. There's even been people who have tried to like teletransport, walk through walls, ESP, and this sort of thing, and I've never seen it be able to produce that.
Now, wait a moment. You say your father was a devil, he acted like Hitler, he was a fraud, he was a drug abuser, he was a person abuser, he's ripped off countless millions of people, and you want a piece of that action?
Yes, as far as the assets are concerned, yes.
Why? Why would you even want to go near that money?
Because I think I can do some good with it.
What would you do with it?
Well, I'd probably use it to get involved in Special Olympics, get involved in helping retarded, handicapped children, and when all of that was done, probably go fishing.
How do you describe Scientology to somebody who's just stepped off a spaceship?
To somebody that just wanted to know?
Sure.
I'd say it's an applied religious philosophy, and the best way to find out is to read a book. It's about people, it's about life, you know, it's about you and me, and you just read about it.
Why has Scientology always been surrounded by controversy? Why do people say that they've been threatened, intimidated?
Fear, force, intimidation, and blackmail.
Mr. DeWolf said he personally beat people when he worked for Scientology. He personally beat them. He personally intimidated, personally got their sex lives, personally threw it up to them to hold everybody in line. Are you saying that what he's saying there is a lie?
What I'm saying...
No, are you saying that's a lie?
Yeah.
He said he beat people.
Listen, I can't say as far as what he says he did in 1952 or whatever. I wasn't there.
No.
I do know...
So there's a possibility that as a Scientology teacher or auditor, he beat people.
If he did, it was in clear violation of all the policies at the time. And that's the point. What I do know...
Why are you laughing?
Standard policy.
Standard policy.
What I'm saying is that since 1959, and you can't blame it on his father, he has committed fraud, he has beat children, he has, and I've got statements as far as administering hallucinogenics to his own children. He's even beat his own son who suffers from Down syndrome.
How do you know that?
Huh? According to the statements, and the signed statements and the interviews that I have. Now, I have evidence. This man has no evidence.
You can't just say that. You have to put some stuff on the table here. You can't just say that.
See, when I'm talking about...
You can't say that. That's not good journalism.
No. But he can say it. This is the point, Dennis. He has said it.
I don't know that he said anything.
He has said some outlandish statements about his father.
No, he said he's criticized the church.
Mm-hmm. I criticize my father, who is the church, as far as I'm concerned. Let's tick off some things where people can look up if they want to. Objective. One, you have 70,000 documents in federal court, Washington, D.C. This was a result of Scientology's Operation Snow White in 1977, in which something like 5,000 Scientology secret agents infiltrated 136 government agencies. 11 people are now in jail, including my father's third wife.
What was Operation Snow White? You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Here are the facts. No government is entirely secure. Regardless of how closely secrets are kept, outside forces will inevitably attempt to influence any state. The United States is no different. Usually the spies are coming from foreign powers, but what if one of the largest infiltrations in US history didn't come from another government at all, but a church? Is it possible that Scientologists really compromised the United States? Here's where it gets crazy. Yes, at least according to US courts. In 1977, a man named Michael Meisner contacted the FBI claiming he'd escaped from captivity and had evidence of criminal actions by Scientologists. This led to the 1978 case of the U.S. versus Mary Sue Hubbard et al., where D.C.'s district court found 11 people guilty of a conspiracy to steal, purloin, and convert to their own use records from the U.S. government. These weren't deep-covered KGB agents either. Instead, these were members of a Church of Scientology group called the Guardian's Office. According to the church's critics, these conspirators were carrying out Operation Snow White, a directive meant to combat negative views of Scientology. In Fair Game, Secrecy, Security, and the Church of Scientology in Cold War America, author Hugh B. Urban claims that the operation illegally stole documents from the IRS, the DEA, and more in an attempt to cover up criminal activity, and also infiltrated other governments around the world. The sweeping nature of this conspiracy, also including the Coast Guard, the American Medical Association, and more, stunned the feds and spurred further investigation. Today, the church maintains that its critics are mischaracterizing the story, that while church founder L. Ron Hubbard did write about a Snow White program, it was meant only to legally address falsities about Scientology. The church notes that while some members of the Guardian's Office committed crimes, they were not acting under orders of Scientology, and the Guardian's Office has since been disbanded. Operation Snow White, they say, never really existed. From their perspective, their enemies are attempting to discredit the church and hoping that false accusations will do the job. The United States disagrees. Instead, it maintains church operatives successfully committed espionage. Today, the church remains a massively successful organization with members around the world. The United States government and the Church of Scientology don't agree on the events of Snow White, but these two sides have one thing in common. They each think there's something the other doesn't want you to know.
In 1972, you alleged in court papers that your father had lived a life characterized by severe mental illness and physical disease, consistent failure and the use of false and fraudulent oft-time criminal means to cover up these failures and to acquire wealth, fame, and power in order to destroy his perceived enemies. What made you draw those conclusions? What did you see that led you to that?
Because I lived it. 99% of what my father wrote and said about himself is totally untrue.
What did you see specifically? I mean, give me an example when you say criminal means. Like, for example, what did you see?
Fraud and deception, the involvement with, in the early days in Phoenix, Arizona, for an example, in 1952, the involvement with organized crime.
Organized crime in what capacity?
The use of Scientology money, his own money, to finance drug importations into the country from Mexico and Colombia.
You saw these things?
Yes, I was involved with several of the incidents.
You recorded any of this? You have papers to prove? Could you walk into court and prove any of these allegations?
I didn't think for years that I could. Most of it I thought was buried, but I think now, since I have been speaking out, that there has been evidence being brought forward proving those allegations.
Why did you leave the church? Because of these allegations, these things that you...
No, well, I left the church for a whole wide variety of reasons. It isn't a very simple answer. I left because my wife wanted me to, and also because I wasn't making any money, because all the money flows, of course, to my father, always has. I was also tired of the fraud and the deception, plus his deep involvement in personal use of drugs on himself and others, black magic,
When you say black magic, what are you talking about? I mean, some of the things that I read in the stack of material, it sounds just absolutely unbelievable. What are you talking about when you say this?
Well, the funny thing is that the actual truth is about as far out as Scientology itself. Really, the basis of Scientology, which is rather hidden and covered over, is the occult, the deep involvement with satanic powers. That he felt that he was deeply involved with a British black magician called Allister Crowley, and through putting himself in deep hypnotic trances and the use of drugs on himself, he wanted to become the most powerful being in the world.
Did you consider all of this a religion? Do you now?
No.
Why not?
Because it's a business. It always has been. I was one of the incorporators of one of the original church organizations, and we incorporated just because the AMA and the IRS were giving him a lot of problems in the early 50s.
What was your relationship like with your father? I mean, for a lot of people, they would say, well, maybe you're doing all of this because you did not have a good relationship with your father, or maybe you're doing all this for the money. Why are you taking these stands?
Because I want to see the truth. And I can't expose my father without exposing myself. I mean, my life is pretty messed up and goofy anyway. In actual fact, who really belongs in this chair is L. Ron Hubbard, my father. But why I'm doing it is let's lay all the facts out and let people decide.
I have a copy of a letter that supposedly came from your father, where he talks about the fact that your mother was an alcoholic and that she deserted both of you, and that you were not in any position to know about him or the church. Do you believe this is an authentic letter, first of all?
I really don't know, but I know that he has these facts all fouled up.
Such as?
Well, that he didn't know me very well. The fact is, from 1952 to 1959, I was very instrumental in and around the organization and the formation of it. I was director of training, taught many, better than 20 advanced clinical courses. I was chief instructor, traveled to England half a dozen times, lived with him. And so that
So you're saying you're in a position to really know your father and the church and the workings of the church?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Why do you believe now that, or do you believe now that your father is alive?
I personally don't believe so, but
why not?
I really don't know. That's just, as I said, a personal belief, but I think that if he is alive, he is certainly quite incompetent to handle his own affairs and is being grossly manipulated by the people around him.
People such as?
Well, in my petition we named, I believe, a 22-year-old boy with about a 9th grade education named David Miscavige, who's one of them.
Now this is a person who belongs to what is called now the Sea Organization, is that correct?
Yes, the Sea Org, and that is the, it's sort of, could be considered the SS arm.
Now, would you explain that? I mean, who are these people, and why have you labeled them that?
Because they're very much parallel a Hitlerite type organization.
And you realize that's very difficult for us to understand that. Here we are sitting in America today in the year 1983, and you're telling us that there's a group of young people who are like the SS.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I mean, how were they indoctrinated? Where were these young people? Where would they have gotten this concept from?
Gotten it from my father. They were raised in Scientology, and all they've known is Scientology and my father. And
were they isolated from the outside world altogether?
Not altogether, but pretty much kept in a very tight group. And of course, outside contact and outside communication has always been kept at a minimum over the years.
When you say SS, I think about harassment, intimidation, even death threats. Have you had any of this?
Oh, it's all of it. I've been the subject of the what's called the fair game doctrine, which has been in existence since the mid-50s. That simply says that anyone perceived as an enemy of L. Ron Hubbard or Scientology can be attacked, sued, lied to, deprived of property, and even destroyed without any
discipline or retribution from the organization.
Someone has actually tried to kill you?
Yes, I believe so, about 3 or 4 times over the years.
But not now that you're out here public? You have not received any more threats?
No, not since I filed my petition. They've been rather quiet since then.
Hey everyone. This week I am doing an interview with a very special former Scientologist and Sea Org member, Karen de la Carriere. You were actually trained to the highest level in Scientology, Class 12. And not just Class 12 auditor, but you were a Class 12 case supervisor. So you were overseeing cases and directing them on what to do from the top of the bridge. Is that, do I have that right?
Yep. Most people on the ship thought of him as God. He really was considered a superhuman being. And Hubbard loved that. He wanted adoration. He wanted acknowledgement. He craved, just like David Miscavige craves all that now. He wanted that. Yes, I thought of him as some kind of genius. I really did. And I watched him do case supervising. Later, you find out how much of everything he took was from others. But at that time, you only thought, God, he's genius. It's interesting, Scientology policy lists what makes you a suppressive person. And one of the things is, if you say that someone other than Hubbard
that's right.
created any of this, you are a suppressive, antisocial personality. That is the fatal flaw in Scientology. It's management by punishment.
Right.
Let's shrink you down. Let's cave you in. Let's make you a dot. Let's make you smaller than a dot. Let's make you a subatomic particle.
Exactly.
I say it's not a religion. The reason they convinced the IRS they were a religion is that they really explained how they're dealing with the spirit. And a spirit is a sort of quasi-religious belief.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Only, whether it's the Bible or any branch of Christianity, dealing with the soul or spirit is not, it's in a different dimension, not physical universe. Therefore, as you know, the whole of OT 3 to OT 8 is to do with exorcising spirits.
Matter, energy, space, and time, MEST theory of the universe, the framework to the OT levels, and something you'll have to understand if you go into pre-OT or OT1, so forth. MEST is those things that science tries to define. It's basically the distraction implant. We can look as far into space with telescopes. We can look as far down into the cell with microscopes. But all of it is a construction of matter, energy, space, and time. The thetan itself is trapped, a theta trap, inside this paradigm. And the goal of Scientology is to first raise awareness of the theta itself through becoming clear through Dianetics, and then in the OT processing to have cause over MEST, which would be to remove the implants of I can't, to remove the implants of I get sick, to free yourself from the restraints of limitations that are put on you artificially by the implants in Incident 2 that we've already discussed. A lot of this material was covered in Scientology 88008 and would be expanded upon in the St. Hill Lectures, the special briefing course, which is no longer available. A lot of Scientologists are stuck as Class 5 auditors at the moment because the special briefing course, which developed a bunch of this stuff before the OT research was finalized and was made waived for OT3, it's been condensed a little bit with the new SPs in leadership, and has in many ways disappeared from the doctrine of the bridge. This is probably the reason why if you go into a Scientology org these days, there are people struggling to walk upstairs. Recently I was asking a member of the founding church up in DC if they, what was the new prices of the PTS to an SP course, and the person who's supposedly a staff member, supposedly an OT, said, well, I'm sorry to get back to you so late. I'd been waiting for a week for this answer. But the course is yada, 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 but I've been sick, blah, blah, blah. How are you sick as an OT? OTs should not get sick. That's Dianetics should have taken care of that. Nonetheless, there are SPs all over just infecting everything, and I can only hope that COB does something about it in the near future. Drag them all off to the RPF. We don't need that bullshit in our church.
The IRS felt, well, this is spiritual, and therefore it has some basics of being a religion. So the primary thing of a cult is adoration and worship to one person who's considered more brilliant, more genius, more effective, more powerful, a supernatural human being. Another thing of a cult is it slowly cuts you off from the outside world. And that is very much Scientology. You are not supposed to date or even mingle with those outside. The cult wants you to cluster, if I can use that word. Yeah.
And of course, there's also this whole thing of, there's the group think and the in-group, sort of idea and mentality. And there's also this sort of fear of things outside that group, this sort of us versus them kind of thing. And they really go out of their way to create that. And it's so subtle. You don't see it when it's happening, but suddenly you are in this place where you realize that the outside world is bad and this world is good. And so therefore, you have to stay inside the parameters of this world in order to be a good person or something. It's really quite crazy how we fall into these things. We would have been having very different conversations about the workability of the tech, the workability of Scientology overall, if it didn't go this authoritarian route. Then some of the beliefs might be a little odd and kooky, and some people might go, well, that's crazy. And certainly Xenu would just be kind of fucking crazy Xenu. But the ARC triangle or the 8 dynamics or even the tone scale, you could kind of look at some of these and go, okay, well, maybe some of this stuff actually makes a little bit of sense and I could use some of this in my life. But the way they've morphed into this authoritarian thing, it just makes all of it the worst possible interpretation of how it could be.
If you really want to lift up the curtains and peep, there are Scientology cult activists stirring the pot behind the scenes.
That's true.
And almost always a big vendetta has some hidden who. Whether they're indies, whether they're free zone, whether they're anonymous.
The Church of Scientology has had its share of critics over the years and more than its share of negative press. The Church has always fought back, but now the critics have harnessed a new platform, the Internet, and Scientology may have a harder time defending itself.
Reconnect! Reconnect!
Groups like this one, called Anonymous, are using cyberspace to challenge the church.
We are Anonymous. We are Legion.
The group's postings on YouTube generated heavy traffic.
We want you to be aware of the very real dangers of Scientology.
Anonymous recently staged protests in several cities, alleging, among other things, the church tears families apart, something the church denies.
They don't care who you are, they disconnect you from your family.
The group is made up of a growing coalition of anti-Scientology activists. Some say they're former Scientologists. They wear masks, they say, to shield themselves from potential harassment by the church and claim their actions are harmless. The Church of Scientology calls Anonymous cyber terrorists who have polluted the internet with lies about the religion. And that's not all.
January 2008, a message from Anonymous is sent to the Church of Scientology.
The church released this video to the media, alleging Anonymous made thousands of harassing phone calls to church members, including death threats. Anonymous says it has waged an online war against Scientology, but says it's not guilty of any hate crimes.
It's a categorically false accusation. We want change, but through peaceful methods.
The FBI told CNN it's investigating whether the group's online videos cross the line between free speech and illegal activity. First Amendment attorney Douglas Morrell says that's often a fine line that's open to interpretation.
From a First Amendment perspective, everybody who speaks on the internet has the right to speak, so long as they're expressing their opinion and aren't defaming anybody. That doesn't mean that the church won't try to come after them.
Legal experts say the church may be facing its biggest challenge yet, trying to protect its image in a loosely policed medium seen by millions of people. Corinne Winter, CNN, Hollywood.
There are literally a handful of people in your position, right, who were ever in your position, personally trained by L. Ron Hubbard all the way to the top.
A class 12 CS, the buck stops. There's no senior more authority you can go to. Right. You are expected to take someone who comes in the door, salivating in the mouth, lunatic, spitting on people, and you can absolutely make that person sane just by the technology, without any referral to a higher authority or help me, I don't know what to do next.
Are you kidding me? This is what's supposed to give me superpowers and telepathy and telekinesis and, cause over life. I thought, yeah, I get how this could clear up some misconceptions, but come on, this doesn't make any sense,
What is outrageous and why I call it a cult is Scientology claim that they have given entities a birth certificate of 75 million years. And that only they, for $850 an hour, can exorcise you.
If you're not familiar with Peter Moon, he's the author of over a dozen books dealing with secret experiments at Montauk, New York, that dealt with time travel, former Nazi scientists, and all kinds of synchronicities. So he's joining me now to discuss his past, as well as his current work and interest in Romania and the Sphinx that's been discovered there, as well as what's underneath it. So, Peter, we've got a lot to talk about with you. You've had a fascinating life, and we could talk for hours, but let's start off because you had a history with Scientology for 10 years, and I'm really curious to know your own interest and what brought you into that.
I got involved in Scientology because I was interested in science fiction, and then I was interested in the esoteric path. And my path led to, I became interested in exploring those caverns of the mind, which are not normally accessible by what we know as normal human behavior. So that became my interest in Scientology, and it was very much a path to evolve. I wanted to evolve and reach my highest potential.
From studying what Hubbard was doing, it seemed like he had taken a lot of Eastern mystical traditions, Buddhist concepts, Taoist in a sense of trying to really understand the essence of what we're doing here as spirits in physical form, right? And I thought there was a lot of positive elements to it, but then you get into the nature of a church and how these, I could imagine there's blackmail involved, how they could kind of hold you based on, what you've divulged in secret or based on, camera work or whatnot that they've recorded. I could see that there's a nefarious side to it and also potential for black magic to be utilized on people as well. So I ultimately did not stay, or join the church, but I found it very interesting what they were trying to do with the mind.
I would say 2 points about that, very interesting. The first point is that the 2 points that I was unfamiliar with when I got involved were the idea of past lives and the idea of what they call exteriorization, which is now termed out-of-body experience, which is very common in today's nomenclature. But the Scientologists sort of had a monopoly on it, not a total monopoly, but a virtual monopoly as far as explaining and giving you this idea. Now, these were two concepts I had no tremendous respect or regard for, having a mind that was very linear, very good in algebra and that sort of thing. I was interested in science. I would also indulge the science fiction, but not so much about spirituality. And I had to learn about these ideas, which were foreign to me and were not naturally accepting to me. But as I got and I was learning how to audit. And when you learned how to audit, it was very inexpensive to get the auditing, so it was virtually free. So therefore, I'd paid a certain amount. I obviously was a young man, I didn't have a lot of money, but I was able to have these tremendous experiences and experience past lives and experience exteriorization, which was wow. And I learned a lot of people that have been in that church 30 or 40 years never had these experiences with the exteriorization. It's like, wow, you know, they question whether it's even possible. Ingo Swann was the one who made it kind of famous with his out-of-body experiments that were done with the Stanford Research Institute. But the two key points there, and the one thing I would say about the past lives, and the whole way it was addressed, or the way I addressed it, is I had to use my imagination. If I did not use my imagination, I would never have made it anywhere. But I've also learned through my training in Qigong and what other virtuous people have said is that your imagination is the key to everything. So when you open that door to imagination, you're actually creating. You're invoking Brahma, if you want to use Hindu terminology. So it enables you to create your mental imagery in space. They sometimes call it creative visualization, which will enable you to resolve psychosomatic ills. So those are a couple of key points that I think are, to address the subject and what made it appealing to many people. And I could give you someday a talk on why it works with celebrities so well. After I got out and I read the reports about his involvement with Allister Crowley on a much deeper level than I realized, I then could look back at how I saw him behave. And he was completely thelemic. Yes, he lived his will. His will, if he wanted something, he would think it, and it might appear, or he might ask somebody for it. That doesn't mean everything he thought would happen, but he lived that life of, what his will, and this is a good way to live, as long as you're not hurting other people. So when you get involved in the Scientology processes, particularly the upper levels, they deal with goals, and there's a whole culture of goals that used to be bandied about, when you were involved in technical application, particularly at the, I guess, what you might call the higher levels or the pre-higher levels. They had to do with goals. But he was also patterning his church after Allister Crowley had, this is what Allister Crowley wanted to do. He wanted to have a church with people adulating him, and he was the head of it. And this is not very well known. I think it's mentioned in some books called the Black Books that were published by New Falcon Press, and in collaboration with a colleague of mine. And he was the one that told me who was in the Golden Dawn. It helped me realize my goals, but they didn't kick in until 7 years later. So 7 years after I left Scientology, then there's 7 year cycles.
Right.
You can study them in different life forms. Well, my 7 year cycle was boom, bam. And I all of a sudden met Preston Nichols, and the Greeks had a word for it. It was, one of them, it was kairos, which was the god of time, which was seizing the moment, sort of like carpe diem. I seized the moment, and I had my chance to bring to fruition all the things I'd learned. So that's kind of how I became involved in all of this from a pragmatic standpoint.
But so Preston Nichols, did he find you, or how did that connection come?
I found Preston through a friend of mine. He said he was an inventor. He had a machine, which is now called the Pyramid of Sound. It's evolved into the Pyramid of Sound, which was designed to balance your chakras or your electromagnetic field.
Right. And then what was his story? Was he the time traveler, or was that Bielik? I'm trying to remember, because honestly, it's such a complicated story with this time travel episode going back to the Philadelphia experiment.
They've all time traveled in one form or another. Al Bielik and Duncan Cameron were the two more conspicuous or famous time travelers. Preston was the technical expert. And all of these people suffered some form of mind control, which I was very familiar with from the Scientology experiences I'd had, and I could recognize what they were going through. Mm-hmm. And and some of it's very subjective and intuitive and specialized, which is hard to communicate. I had an expertise in understanding certain things of a rarefied nature, and so I could understand and respect and appreciate what they'd been through. But Preston Nichols is a scientist. I billed him as the foremost expert on electromagnetics in the world.
Does it begin with Montauk, or does it begin with the Philadelphia experiment?
Well, all things begin with the Philadelphia experiment as far as this story goes.
Okay.
And,
so let's go there.
Yes, which story I'm sure you're familiar with is the trying to make the ship, the USS Eldridge, appear invisible to radar and sonar. And when to make a very long story short, when they made it invisible to radar, it also became invisible and went out of this dimension.
We have some of our great business leaders and leaders, period, right behind me. I may ask Marilyn Lockheed, billions and billions of dollars worth of that beautiful F-35. It's stealth. You cannot see it. Is that correct? Better be correct, right?
A lot of planes, in particular the F-35 fighter jet, which is, almost like an invisible fighter.
Bye.
I was asking the Air Force guys, I said, how good is this plane? They said, well, sir, you can't see it. I said, yeah, but in a fight, a fight like I watch on the movies, a fight, they're fighting. How good is it? They say, well, it wins every time because the enemy cannot see it. Even if it's right next to it, it can't see it. Ding, ding, ding. That's a good thing. But, I mean, we have equipment that nobody has the equipment that we have. Nobody has the equipment that we have.
So amazing that we're ordering hundreds of millions of dollars worth of new airplanes. Bye-bye. Especially the F-35. Do you like the F-35? I said, how does it do it in fights? And how do they do in fights with the F-35? I said, we do very well. You can't see it. You can't see it. So it's hard to fight a plane that you can't see, right? But that's an expensive plane that you can't see. That's an expensive plane that you can't see. That's an expensive.
Hello?
The F-35 aircraft, that's the most sophisticated aircraft in the world. Jet fighters. Bye-bye. Total stealth. They're hard to find. They're hard to see, therefore they're hard to beat. It's very tough to beat a plane when you can't see it. Marilyn Lockheed.
Thank you, Marilyn. You've done a fantastic job. Thank you, Marilyn. Hey, Fred, she makes a plane you can't see. It's stealth. F-35. I hope you can't see it at least, right? Great job. Thank you very much.
Well, now more on Tuesday's big news, the F-35 Hybrid Product Support Integrator Organization that will bring hundreds of new jobs to Wright-Patt.
City development experts say this will have a tremendous impact on the entire Miami Valley. 2 News reporter Deborah Bogart joins us from Wright-Patt with more. It was a bipartisan effort from Ohio lawmakers to bring the mission here to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base because it's uniquely qualified to handle a project at this caliber. But the positive effects will be felt far beyond the gates. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is Ohio's top single-site employer with almost 30,000 jobs and will soon see the growth of 400 more. But United States Air Force says Wright-Patt was the top contender for the new F-35 Hybrid Product Support Integrator Organization for a number of reasons: affordability, location, and acquisition of workforce. Jeff Hoagland of Dayton Development Coalition agrees. He says beyond the creation of at least 400 jobs, it is a vote of confidence in the workforce, community, and the state of Ohio.
Best aircraft in the world. It's not just a 20-year program, it's a 50-year program.
Both Ohio legislators and Hoagland said in the future it's likely that more jobs will be added, as well as more opportunities at nearby universities that will train for these highly paid, highly intellectual jobs.
The key component here is the people who were aboard the Eldridge that had suffered trauma, physical trauma, mental trauma, and this began a human factor study, which eventually took place at Brookhaven Labs, which was adjacent to an old Nazi compound in Yaphank, Long Island. Now, this is a big Nazi connection here because they were able to mix this human factor study with the study of the Mengele studies. Joseph Mengele did all these studies on twins on Jews, brutal experiments on Jews and twins.
It's basically the basis for the mind control experiments of MK Ultra, right?